listening to 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker, and my name is Paul Vallone. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd like to also thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, castle doctrine and stand your ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of people from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. As much as I hate to say it, here we are again. Yet another well-known miscreant has killed yet another group of people. This time on Valentine's Day, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz entered the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Broward County, Florida, from which he had been expelled, and he killed 17 people, reportedly with an AR-15. Everybody knew Cruz was a time bomb. Students joked that he was likely to shoot up the school. He had been, and stopped going to, mental health counseling. But more importantly, this was yet another failure of the government to protect you. Local police had been sent to his home 36 times. More significantly, it has now come to light that someone who knew Cruz reported him to the FBI, which failed to follow up on the lead. Now, I'd like to refer you to GRNC's YouTube channel, where you can still find a video called The Great Gun Debate, during which I debated a group of leftists, more or less single-handedly, I should note, since the so-called gun advocates they had picked for my side were largely useless. I think the video is actually entitled Out of the Mouths of Leftists. One of my opponents, community organizer Rick Marshall, actually even got laughed at by his own side when he said, "What do you need guns for? We have the government to take care of us." Well, once again, he is proven a fool. According to the New York Post, Broward County Sheriff's deputies visited Nicholas Cruz's home no fewer than, it was 39 times over 7 years. At a time, we should note, when his mother was still alive and when he was a minor. Now, why didn't social services workers intervene into the life of a minor who is so obviously going awry? Now, you've doubtless heard that in 2017, YouTube vlogger Ben Benight reported to the FBI that one Nicholas Cruz left a comment saying, and I quote, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." And you probably heard the FBI claim they couldn't definitively identify who left the comment, even though he left his name. Now it comes to light that the FBI got a tip about Cruz just last month. On January 5th, someone close to Cruz called the FBI's public access line to express concern about his erratic behavior and his social media postings. But the FBI dropped the ball. The information was never forwarded to the Miami field office, and no further actions were taken. They're apologizing for that now, but how does apologizing make a difference to 17 grieving families? So maybe we should sue the FBI for not protecting us, right? Wrong. According to court decisions, specifically Warren versus D.C. and Riss versus New York, they have established that the police have no obligation to protect you as an individual, confirming that my debate opponent is not only a fool, but was an ignorant fool. Now, the media lies about the school shootings began almost immediately. You will undoubtedly hear some version of these lies from friends, relatives, co-workers, and other useful idiots who passively absorb this nonsense from the ostensibly mainstream media. I'm going to give you the ammunition you need to shoot them down. So here you have it, folks, the 5 big lies of the Broward County shootings. Lie number 1, that Donald Trump repealed laws to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally unstable. Now, said Cecilia Vega of ABC News, and I quote, "One of the only major actions that President Trump has taken on gun control is to block an Obama-era rule that made it harder for the mentally ill to have access to guns." But it gets better. Listen to USA Today, and I quote, "After a suspected gunman was accused of killing 17 people at a Florida school with a legally purchased AR-15 rifle, one of President Trump's early tweets about the horrific event focused not on gun control, but on mental health. Quote, so many signs that the Florida shooter was mentally disturbed, even expelled from school for bad and erratic behavior," Trump wrote Thursday morning on Twitter. "Neighbors and classmates knew he was a big problem, must always report such instances to authorities again and again." USA Today goes on to say, what he didn't mention, in one of his early acts as president, Trump signed a measure passed by the Republican-led Congress that repealed an Obama-era regulation designed to block some mentally ill people from buying guns. Mentally ill people. Remember those words. Of course, the piece then belatedly lists the truth, that the so-called mental health regulation repealed had been an Obama requirement for the Social Security Administration to report to the National Instant Background Check System as prohibited persons any Social Security recipient who designated a benefits payee to handle their finances. In other words, it had absolutely nothing to do with mental health, and especially nothing to do with the Broward County school shootings. This was a measure that Obama would have restricted tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people from owning guns based on the fact that they had somebody else balance their checkbook. Now, this is typical of the drive-by media. They tell a lie, or at least a false implication, in the title or in the first few sentences of an article, knowing that the average Joe won't read the whole thing, but instead will get the incorrect impression from the top of the piece. Lie number 2, that common sense gun laws such as background checks could have prevented the Broward shootings. For example, Barack Obama, who apparently can't quite handle the fact that he's no longer president, had to weigh in for new gun control. He tweeted, and I quote, "Until we can honestly say that we're doing enough to keep them safe from harm, including long overdue common sense gun safety laws that most Americans want, then we have to change." This, of course, carefully avoids mentioning that Nicholas Cruz passed a background check in purchasing the gun he used. Exactly the same sort of background check they claim will keep us safe. Lie number 3, that Republicans are somehow responsible for the shootings. According to Chelsea Handler and others, the shootings are all Republicans' fault. Handler tweeted, and I quote, "We have to elect candidates that are not funded by the NRA in November. We have an opportunity to elect candidates who won't allow kids to go to school and get shot. It is disgusting how many times this has happened, and Republicans do nothing. You all have blood on your hands. We're going to take a quick break, after which we will resume with the 5 big lies of the Broward County shootings. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Right now, we'll take a short break, after which we will resume with a discussion of the Broward County shootings and the real solutions. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Sponsored by Hyatt Gun Shop, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. We were talking about the February 15th school shootings in Broward County, Florida. Our topic at the break was the top 5 lies of the Broward County shootings. Before the break, we recounted the first 3. Now let's pick up with number 4. Lie number 4, that new gun control isn't possible because the NRA lines the pockets of Republicans. Attacks have appeared against pro-gun legislators in a variety of media outlets and targeted a variety of legislators, including our own Senators Richard Burr and Tom Tillis. The apparently coordinated nature of the attacks, by the way, suggests that media were possibly working from talking points from one of the gun control organizations, most likely Michael Bloomberg's Everytown for Gun Safety. How about this little gem of a headline, which ran in both editions of the McClatchy organs I call Pravda, namely the Raleigh News and Observer and the Charlotte Observer? Here it is. North Carolina senators got more money from the NRA than most lawmakers. Here's why. The crux of these hit pieces are claims that pro-gun, typically Republican legislators, are quashing new gun control because they are lining their pockets with NRA money. The article's headline, how the senators were, quote, beneficiaries of millions of dollars in NRA largesse. Similarly, another article claimed that Senator Marco Rubio, and I use this word exactly, quote, accepted, okay, $3.3 million. The Rubio accepted $3.3 million. But the articles, and most like them, are lies. Lies which depend on the public's failure to understand the vagaries of campaign finance laws. In truth, you see, the NRA itself, as a not-for-profit organization, is severely limited in what it can legally expend to elect or defeat political candidates. That's why my organization, Grassroots North Carolina, like the NRA, operates a federally registered political action committee. For us, it is the GRNC Political Victory Fund. For the NRA, it is the NRA Political Victory Fund. But under Federal Election Commission regulations, even political action committees, or PACs, are limited in the donations they can give candidates. Specifically, they are limited to $5,000 per candidate per election cycle, not, I can assure you, millions of dollars as claimed by the media hit pieces. Instead, what GRNC and NRA do, like most other political nonprofits, is to make independent expenditures, which are typically mailings, TV ads, or radio ads for or against candidates. But here is the important part. The part the media hit pieces don't want you to know. Those independent expenditures cannot, by law, be coordinated in any way with the politician they benefit. You can't consult with them, and more importantly, they will never see a dime of the money you spend. Of course, some of the articles that I've mentioned also mention that the money spent is actually through independent expenditures, but they carefully do so at the bottom of the article, secure in the knowledge that most readers will only skim the first few sentences. And finally, lie number 5. We have the claim that there have been a horrific 18 school shootings just this year alone, in 2018. 18 school shootings in 2018. That would be horrific if it were true, but it's a lie. This falsehood is making its rounds on the internet and in the news. Despite the fact that it's a lie, believe it or not, in a rare moment of intellectual honesty, it was outed by the Washington Post. To wit, and I quote, "The figure originated with Everytown for Gun Safety, a nonprofit group co-funded by Michael Bloomberg," entirely funded by Michael Bloomberg, but that's a different matter, that works to prevent gun violence and is most famous for its running tally of school shootings. This, the organization tweeted at 4:22 Wednesday, is the 18th school shooting in the U.S. in 2018. A tweet by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, including the claim, had been liked by more than 45,000 times by Thursday evening, and one from political analyst Jeff Greenfield had cracked 126,000. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio tweeted it too, as did performers Cher and Alexander William and actors Misha Collins and Albert Brooks. News organizations, including MSNBC, ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, Time, MSN, the BBC, and New York Daily News, and the Huffington Post, also used the number in their coverage. In other words, they just took a number at face value from a gun control organization, probably the most dishonest gun control organization of them all. By Wednesday night, the top suggested search after typing 18 into Google was 18 school shootings in 2018. It is a horrifying statistic, and it is wrong. Every town has long inflated its total, by including incidents of gunfire that are not really school shootings. Take, for example, what it counted as the year's first. On the afternoon of January 3rd, a 31-year-old man who had parked outside a Michigan elementary school called police to say he was armed and suicidal. Several hours later, he killed himself. The school, however, had been closed for 7 months. There are no teachers. There were no students. Also listed on the organization's site is an incident from January 20th when at 1 a.m. a man was shot at a sorority event on the campus of Wake Forest University. A week later, at a baseball game, as a baseball game was being played at a Michigan high school, someone fired several rounds from a gun in a parking lot. No one was injured, and it was past 8 p.m., well after classes had ended for the day, but every town still labeled it a school shooting. There's more, of course, but the takeaway here is that the lies told by Michael Bloomberg and his henchmen are so extreme that even the leftists at the Washington Post can't support them. But, of course, that didn't stop those lies from becoming factoids that everybody knows. In truth, what we saw yet again was the failure of gun control to prevent a violent sociopath from committing a mass killing. Once again, the Democrats are calling for universal background checks, even though yet another shooter passed exactly the background check that gun control advocates assured us would prevent such carnage. This is now at least the third consecutive instance in which a mass killer passed a check by the computerized National Instant Background Check System, or NICS, to buy the guns he used for carnage. The other thing we're hearing is that it's a travesty that Cruz wasn't old enough to buy a beer, but was old enough to buy a nasty old assault weapon, said Robin Thomas, executive director of the Gifford Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Quote, "It used to be the case that long guns were hunting guns. There were bolt-action shotguns and single-action rifles and things really people bought for hunting or sport shooting, and they weren't the kind of AR-style rifles that are used in mass shootings. Garbage. Until 1968, teenagers could buy World War II semi-automatic rifles by mail, if they so desired. Nor was the shooter in this case just a child, as his lawyer would have you believe. If indeed we should deny dangerous objects to 19-year-olds like Cruz, then we had better deny them driver's licenses, pilot's licenses, the ability to pilot boats, and a host of other potentially dangerous activities. But of course, the left won't want that. They only want to deny 19-year-olds guns because that's what fits their preordained political agenda. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Right now, we'll take a short break, after which we will resume with a discussion of the Florida school shootings and potential solutions. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Sponsored by Hyatt Gun Shop, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Now, before our break, we were discussing the February 15th Fort Lauderdale school shootings and proposed solutions to stop these sorts of mass killings. Among the more viable proposals under discussion are those to keep the mentally ill from getting guns. Now, that sounds reasonable, especially considering that a report from someone who knows the would-be shooter can stop carnage. In fact, it would have stopped the carnage in this case had the FBI actually acted on that report. Ditto for reports on most of the recent mass killings, where people knew these shooters were a danger to themselves and others. In fact, on the same day as the Broward County shootings, a state of Washington grandmother prevented shootings there by actually just reading the journal of her grandson and then calling police. She discovered that her grandson, 18-year-old Joshua Alexander O'Connor, had hidden a rifle in a guitar case and was planning to literally flip a coin to decide whether to shoot up a school. Now, eventually, after she called, he was booked into the Snohomish County Jail on charges of attempted murder, robbery, and assault on an officer. So, we see that these sorts of reports do work. However, when it comes to identifying and restricting the rights of the mentally ill, the devil is in the details. In particular, I want you to watch out for California-style gun restraining orders, which you will be told will solve the problem, quote, by keeping guns out of the hands of the mentally ill. Well, a lot of these proposals don't offer any due process of law and deprive people of their rights unceremoniously without any means of recourse. For example, under the misnamed SAFE Act, New York State now has a list of 34,500 people on a prohibited list which has no provision for due process of law. Indeed, one upstate veteran discovered sheriff's deputies on his doorstep one day to confiscate his guns. It seems that the state had incorrectly lumped him in with other mental defectives and put him on the list. It took him time, money, and effort to finally get his guns back. So whatever proposals you hear need to include provisions for due process of law, a chance for the accused to defend himself, and a system for removal from any list that he or she might find himself on. Moreover, consider that there is nothing unique about guns. If you buy into the argument that we should stop people from getting guns without restricting other potentially dangerous activities, you are buying into the same sort of argument as saying that you want to reduce gun violence. Really? Is death by knife better than death by gun? Are you really saying that you want to reduce violence by gun, but not by motor vehicle, or improvised explosive device, or knife, or poison, or baseball bat? The truth is that if somebody is too dangerous to own guns, he or she is too dangerous to own a motor vehicle, too dangerous to serve in the military, too dangerous to occupy certain jobs, and probably too dangerous to be loose in the general population. What can stop the carnage immediately is to stop creating the so-called gun-free zones, victim disarmament zones, which invariably attract both terrorists and violent sociopaths like Nicholas Cruz. As Dr. John R. Lott of the Crime Prevention Research Center notes, during the period from 1950 through July 10th of 2016, fully 98.4%, yes, 98.4% of mass killings in the United States have taken place where guns are ostensibly prohibited. And as Dr. Lott notes, the only thing which will deter violent sociopaths is the probability of encountering an armed victim. In Broward County, as in other mass killings, the entire tragedy took place in just 6 minutes. Similarly, police who responded to the San Bernardino terrorist shootings arrived in only a few minutes. I believe it was 3 minutes. Yet they were already too late. You've probably heard the cliche that when seconds count, help is only minutes away. Well, it's true. And law enforcement officers, LEOs, know it too, and they've adjusted their tactics accordingly. Rather than waiting for all units to arrive, as they did way back when at Columbine, they now require each officer to respond immediately upon arrival to go in and look for an active shooter. But as the current tragedy proves, even that is too late. The only thing that will stop some of these shooters is having someone armed on the site. Arming teachers, for example, is long overdue. The Israelis have been doing it successfully for decades. Yeah, school entrances should be hardened, with access restricted, and those who enter should be searched. But teachers who volunteer and seek training must be allowed to carry firearms for protecting the children they teach. I personally would advocate something along the lines of the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program, wherein volunteer pilots, airline pilots, are trained and federally deputized to protect the cockpit. We can do the same thing with teachers to protect classrooms. And of course, that's why a Police One survey found that 81% of law enforcement officers support arming teachers. Now, in the recent tragedy, an assistant football coach and security guard, Aaron Feiss, used his own body to shield students. He gave his life for his students. We must give our teachers more than their bodies to stop the bullets. Now, arming teachers is the immediate and short-term solution. There's also a long-term solution. For some years now, I've remarked that our society has replaced reason with rules. Nowhere is it more evident than when I, a middle-aged, balding man, order a drink at a bar, upon which the bartender demands proof that I'm 21 years old. When I say, "You're kidding, right?" he responds, "Sorry, we have to card everybody. It's the rule." That's when I generally say, we've replaced reason with rules, right? That's my little and probably vain effort to make people think about the state of our society. That might sound funny, but think about it. Everything is now enforced not by common standards of behavior, but by zero-tolerance policies with draconian penalties for violation. In schools, students get suspended for molding a cookie into the shape of a gun. In workplaces, employees get fired for using a word somebody somewhere deems offensive, where once we would have expected the bartender to exercise reasonable judgment in deciding who he does or does not card, or we would have said to an employee who said something unreasonable, "Didn't your mother teach you better than that?" Now we have replaced those cultural norms. The expectation of reasonable behavior has been replaced with rules and laws that carry penalties for noncompliance. Why? Now hold on to that thought for a moment and bear with me. It will take me a moment, but you will see how this bears on the current problem. But first, we're going to take a short break. We will return with what has changed in our culture, which has resulted in the increase in mass killings, and more importantly, what we can do about it. Meanwhile, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7. After our break, we will resume with a discussion of the school shootings and what we can do about it. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. Before the break, we were discussing the February 15th Broward County school shootings and proposed solutions to stop these sorts of mass killings. In the 1990s, we began to see a trend toward multiple victim public homicides, especially mass shootings in schools, most often by students. The question is, why? In decades past, especially the 1960s and before, everybody had guns, including kids. Teenagers hunted and even took their guns in their cars to school with them. Even as late as the 1970s, I took a rifle to school to demonstrate gun safety to my Boy Scout troop for my riflery merit badge. And yes, I even grew up in the People's Republic of New York. Child safety locks for guns didn't exist, and gun safes were the province only of big-time collectors who were protecting their gun collections not from children, but from burglars. Moreover, until 1995, there were no mandatory background checks to buy a gun, and a prohibition on guns for felons and the mentally unstable didn't even exist until 1968. Yet mass killings, and especially school shootings by teenagers, were unknown. The question is, what has changed? It certainly isn't the so-called easy availability of firearms. This is America, Everybody has guns. Since records have been kept, roughly half of American households have contained guns. What changed are some very specific things in our culture. The 1960s happened, and with them an entirely new way of looking at morals. You might not be familiar, or maybe you are, with a best-selling 1958 novel entitled The Ugly American, which has been called, and I quote, one of the most influential political novels of our time. Set in a fictional Asian country, it was a commentary on our adventures in Southeast Asia, specifically the build-up to what would eventually become the Vietnam War. The premise is that by virtue of our blundering and insensitivity to local cultures, diplomatically we end up losing to the ever-polished and sophisticated communists. Yes, as early as 1958, the American left was celebrating the many achievements of Joe Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, and Soviet communism. In fact, the ugly American became the stereotype for all Americans: jingoistic, loud, pretentious, and obnoxious, so certain that our values were correct that we ignored those of other cultures. And with proper nurturing from opponents of Vietnam and the counterculture revolution of the 1960s, so began the cultural self-loathing that is so endemic to the American left. And by the way, I should note here that by some accounts, the Soviet Union played a large role in the American counterculture movement, especially the anti-war movement, contributing by some estimates up to $1 billion to the anti-war organizations. This rings especially true when you consider the recent meddling in American elections. Now, please pay attention to the words cultural self-loathing. They are exactly correct. In a fairly historic twist of irony, leftists hate the culture which has allowed them to exist. Had they grown up to create a counterculture in the land of Joe Stalin, whom they so love, they would have been crushed in an instant. It was Gene Kirkpatrick who in 1984 at the Republican National Convention branded the haters of America as the Blame America First crowd. Perhaps stinging from the accusation and wishing to be more politically saleable, the cultural self-loathing has been rebranded as multiculturalism in the late 1980s and 1990s. Intrinsic in multiculturalism is the notion that no culture is superior to any other, that we are all just different. That is what allows the leftists to ignore the barbarism of Islamic fundamentalism and Sharia law, from demanding that women wear the hijab to stoning them to death for adultery. And that brings us to multiculturalism's bastard child, moral relativism. The fundamental premise of moral relativism is that given different cultures and perspectives, nobody is objectively right or wrong. And more importantly, no behavior is right or wrong. Moreover, because no behavior is right or wrong, we must learn to tolerate those behaviors with which we do not agree. That's it in a nutshell. There's no right or wrong, no good or no evil, and of course, no common underlying morality. No good and evil. Now, enter a young and impulsive sociopath. He doesn't socialize well with his peers. He starts getting drawn to the negative cultural influences of our time, the anonymous social media, the violent video games. And he starts developing his list of perceived grievances. After all, the 60s children have taught him that it isn't important what one achieves, but rather how one feels about himself or herself. So begins the pity party, in which he needs self-esteem, but is denied the basis for that self-esteem by the peers who reject him. Now he's angry. Now, people have been angry with their circumstances since the beginning of time. What differs now is that where previously Judeo-Christian values ingrained in society emphasized basic right and wrong, basic good and evil, now our sociopath is told that there is no right and no wrong, that deviant behaviors are just different and cannot be judged. When someone with an aggravated need for self-esteem and no moral compass for right or wrong decides to gain the recognition he feels has been wrongly denied him, the question becomes not whether he should take a rifle to his school to kill his classmates, but rather, why not? Now, for the difficult part. What I have just said should be so obvious, so self-evident, that we should be forced to ask why leftist intellectuals who tell us they have all the solutions, which of course invariably center on gun control, why these intellectuals cannot seem to fathom the truth that our trend toward mass killings is resulting from the lack of basic notions of right and wrong, good and evil. Why don't the leftists, who claim to want a solution to the problem of mass killing, propose that we re-emphasize those basic notions of right or wrong as a means of stopping sociopathic mass killers? We could do a public education campaign. We could ingrain this notion into children. Yet we don't. The question is, why won't the left allow us to do that? Remember what I said about how the American left breaks into two groups: the useful idiots and the manipulators of the useful idiots. The idiots, your neighbor, the leftist, or your clueless cousin, they aren't really the problem. They are just regurgitating what they've been fed. The problem is the manipulators of the useful idiots, the Chuck Schumers, the Barack Obamas, the Hillary Clintons, and their allegedly enlightened counterparts in academia and the media. The fact is that these people should have figured it out by now, but they haven't. Or at least by all appearances they haven't. Why not? Could it be that the leftists who claim to know what's best for you really don't want to solve the problem? Because if they did, it would deny them an excuse to impose still more governmental control over you, more gun control, more surveillance, more restrictions on your activities. Could it be that consciously or unconsciously, some actually want these mass killings in order to advance their agenda for authoritarianism? That is something we'll examine in future shows. My name is Paul Vallone. You've been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. Please check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Once again, that's gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find early editions of the show. You can also find us on YouTube and Facebook. See you next Sunday at 5.